Hey, what up, everybody? It's your boy Carson Fox with another special edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. What do you know? You had me last week with a special edition, then the preview show on Friday, then the recap episode of the Cincinnati game on Sunday, and then now you have me back here. So it must be an important and busy time in West Virginia football, and the reason why I'm coming at you is because, what do you know? The good old transfer portal opens up in 2 weeks. Woo! Or actually not, I say that facetiously. And why I even bring this up is something that I think might have been lost in between. I think it was the BYU game and the Oklahoma game, was just a small snippet. If you tune into Neal Brown's pregame shows, that he does on Monday afternoons, then the Wednesday, like what's happening in WVU Football, sit-downs between Tony Caridi and Neal Brown, then his Thursday night shows with Tony Caridi at Kegler's. There are little nuggets that you can parse through the questioning back and forth with the journalist and just find these small things. And this was something that I think that was really missed during that press conference with Neal Brown a couple of weeks ago. He said up to a third of the roster could change with the transfer portal. And I don't think this was necessarily just specific to WVU. I think that he was kind of speaking in generalities of what's been happening these last few years in college football. But of course, West Virginia being one of the teams that has been affected most, as we know as Mountaineer fans, by the transfer portal over the last few years. Not necessarily the complete overhaul that we saw at schools like Colorado this past offseason, but that was a whoa moment for me. For a guy who, has an Excel spreadsheet in which I feel like I play general manager and watching on everybody's eligibility and where they kind of are in their grades, as well as kind of where they are on their depth chart and kind of like tracking their progress kind of informally. That was a whoa moment for me when a third of the roster was going to change, because I look back at last year and the scholarship players that left in the transfer portal last year, 18 of them. So I was just doing the numbers. That's not a third right there. But then I kind of looked, 4 players are either retired or were not retained. So James Gamitter, we can recall, Casey Legg, both retired at the end of last season, not using their last real year of COVID eligibility to play this year. And also Donovan Beaver and Colton McGee just went missing off this roster. So 15 players did join the transfer portal to West Virginia's team last year for this season. So that's 37 players overall. So that's where Neal Brown gets that number of a third of the roster really changing over. I mean, actually, that's even closer to half. I think, and I said this at the time when I was just doing videos on Twitter, I really thought the top 3 that were the most consequential for this year's team were Charles Woods, Jordan Jefferson, and Caden Prather. So this is a big week right now when you take a look at it of when those 3 players transferred. I'm not going to go through all of the 18 who left and like their timing of it, but Charles Woods entered the transfer portal on the first day of transfer portal season last year, which came up on December 4th. And that's exactly when the transfer portal is going to open up this year. It's the Monday after conference championship games end, so that's coming up in 2 weeks from now. Jordan Jefferson left right before Christmas, so surprise, here's your Christmas present. Jordan Jefferson's going to LSU. And then Caden Prather left in the transfer portal right before the transfer portal closed at the beginning of January last year. So let's look at the timeline. We're hitting November 20th, so one more game of the regular season, and then it's going to be a quick turnaround, and players can up and leave this program. So we've already had a few already hit the transfer portal, not necessarily with any real public announcements, but it was Jeremiah Aaron and Cortez Bram who left right around week 4 of this season. I don't know why, still to this day, because they had the opportunities to take down starting positions and really take hold of it, but instead opted to leave. And then Davis Mallinger and Lance Dixon, who was kind of, but not really, told to leave the program after some violation of team rules, let's call it this way, but I guess some things that happened, I think, on the away game at Houston. So for now, general manager, yes, West Virginia football has a general manager, just like the NFL and the pros. Drew Fabianich, head coach Neal Brown, I think director of player relations Rasheed Marshall being involved in this, and then Country Roads Trust COO Stephen Ford. And I'm probably missing some people who are involved in this process. That this is really the dark webs of college football in today's world, that we don't necessarily understand the process. We get those. From comments by like Lane Kiffin, or I know Mike Elko just came out, saw something on Twitter of saying like the Wild Wild West is just about to happen, college football free agency in full gear. And it's crazy that it happens right after the regular season ends. So you have all of these teams who are going to be preparing for bowl games through the months of December and then into January. You're going to have coaches being fired really a week from today, maybe like even extending into next week as well. And then we hit the transfer portal opening, and it's just never quiet in the world of college football. So I'll get to what my point in a second is. Over this week, and I think into the next week, what's going to happen for this West Virginia football program is very, very important for what is going to happen in 2024. So the fair market, like all these people are going to be gathering intel on the fair market value and name, image, and likeness value for all of the players on their roster, which really is research speculation, in my opinion. Like, you may be a fan or a follower of On3 for recruiting or somewhere else, and like if you Google any one of West Virginia's players' names and put in NIL, the number one hit on your Google search is going to come up On3. And I looked at it today. I looked at I think it just had football and basketball, so no real baseball valuation or any of the women's sports or whatever, but for the football and basketball players, it gives a NIL valuation for this team for some of these players, if you want to know what their value are. Not all of them, but it gave me really their top 6, which I'll get to in a second. So they're going to be doing this research on NIL market value. They're going to project what is the impact of each player for 2024. They're going to and the players are going to be invited to, I would say, individual meetings between, I don't know if it's Neal Brown who does it, or now if it's Fabianich, or who's all involved, but they're going to be offered, in a way, an NIL deal for like this next upcoming year for them to consider. And it's also having to consider what Country Roads Trust war chest payroll is for this upcoming year, with what West Virginia's already promised its class of 2024 recruits. So I think that Brown and other staffers or someone from Country Roads Trust, I don't know how this works. I would love to know more if you know more about this. So leave your comments here on YouTube to let me know about this. But all of these players are going to have their 2024 seasons recap to look ahead, and then I would say presented their initial offers for 2024 in the hopes that they're either going to accept there on the spot or it's going to be received well. They may take that back. I mean, now that I think college football players can have agents, so if agents are also involved into this whole process, it's just the new age of college football that I really do despise. And I may be off on my timeline just a little bit, but I mean, I'm looking at the academic calendar for WVU, and the classes end for this semester December 7th, so that's quick. It's a quick turnaround. Finals take place December 11th through 15th, so West Virginia will obviously be practicing for bowl games in between this time. It's not like the season ends, these players just sit around and mull this over, so they will be taking up their time by bowl preparations. But then the new semester starts January 8th. So, in a blink of an eye between when this final game ends on Saturday late night in Waco to what happens by January 8th is such a pivotal time, and this is why I think that this is the most important time for West Virginia football for moving forward for 2024 is the roster management and how that Country Roads Trust invests in these football players for next year, because there's a young core a part of this team that I think that has proved themselves, and with 3 years of extra eligibility, you may have some teams who come sniffing from some of the powers in the SEC. Let's just directly go out there and say that. West Virginia did a great job last year, I feel like, of using retention to its advantage of this past year. So, I mean, hearing some of the hearing the interview this past summer with Stephen Ford and what WVU was able to do, $1 million in NIL use for the 2022 roster. I can only imagine how much what that went to for this year's roster in 2023. I don't know if we'll ever get to know that information, or if Ford will ever talk about this as NIL evolves, of what did West Virginia spend on its roster in 2023. If you look at what On3 says for, let's take West Virginia's top 6 players, Wyatt Milam comes in at the NIL valuation of $477,000. Second is Cole Taylor at $156,000. C.J. Donaldson at $143,000. Rodney Gallagher, $142,000. Nico Marchiol, $77,000. And Garrett Green at $67,000. So just between those 6 players, and remember, there are 85 players on scholarships, that's $1 million right there. So between 6 players, according to On3, which is supposed to be a leader in NIL valuation, those 6 players are going to command what the entire 2022 roster was paid through NIL dollars. So it's just going to continue to increase, and that's what's crazy about this world of college football is if you want to retain talent and you want to go get talent, your war chest has to be bigger and bigger than ever. So that's why I talked about this, and why I haven't gotten so into basketball season this year is I wonder if Country Roads' war chest is larger now for this upcoming season of, and I know I'm talking about December to December, so we're talking about 2024 at this point. Is their war chest larger to spend, and will there be an athletic department driven emphasis for NIL dollars for football players over basketball players, given what has transpired in the last 6 months with the basketball teams because of the Bob Huggins situation? Is there enough money for West Virginia to go out there and retain all of the guys that it needs for 2024 to be this conference championship contending year in the Big 12, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving the conference and bringing in these 4 new powers from out west? Is West Virginia going to be going out there, and are they going to spend $500,000 on Wyatt Milam? Are they going to spend $150,000 on Cole Taylor? So on and so forth. And then the most important thing after what it spends on the high school recruits for this year, is it going to have enough money left over to go out there and be aggressive in the transfer portal and add at some players of much needed emphasis? So there was another quick question of, I don't know exactly who asked this. I couldn't tell by the voice listening to the press conference today, of asking, what are the positions that you're targeting in the transfer portal? And Brown quickly deflected that. Ask me that after, we'll see after we get back from Baylor on late Sunday morning. So this thought, I think this is what's crazy about what college football in the year of our Lord 2023 is that you have unlimited free agency, and who's to say that if even West Virginia puts out this offer next week to say a Jaheim White, that he goes through the entire winter portal season, gets into spring practice, and either someone suffers an injury at Alabama in the running back core, or Florida, or let's say USC, to throw out a notorious poacher in Lincoln Riley, and wow, let's go after our guys talk to Jaheim White's guys, and you're making an offer that really you can't refuse. Tens of thousands of dollars more to play football just for one season perhaps. Like in the case of Jordan Addison a couple of years ago. So I think that this is going to create for really tough decisions that I think Fabianich and Brown will have to make on some players who either have one last year of COVID eligibility on which they're willing to pass potentially for a younger player, or have a free the player has a free or graduate transfer opportunity available to potentially receive better offers elsewhere, either by way of playing time or more money. So this is so important, I feel like, for 2024 for West Virginia to re-sign, if you want to call it that, and comparing professional level and the terminology and what they have to do with these players. So I put together really an indispensable list that I'd love to share with y'all, and I'd love to know how you feel on this. I think guys that you have to bring back at all costs, not only for 2024, but for beyond and what their prospects are. Garrett Green, Nico Marchiol, C.J. Donaldson, Jaheim White, Cole Taylor, Traylon Ray, Rodney Gallagher, Wyatt Milam, Tomas Rimac, yes, Brandon Yates, a guy who I was very, very hard on in the 2021 season on the way that he got worked in that guaranteed rate bowl out in Arizona against Minnesota. So I can't believe this. But given that Zach Frazier is probably going on to the NFL, Yates had some backup time at playing center, so I think that he's a next man up there at the center position potentially, like an internal option. Otherwise, you're going with Landon Livingston, who's really just played, a redshirt freshman, who then would be a redshirt sophomore, but who hasn't really had the kind of playing, experience this year or last year because you had Frazier there. So Jaquay Hubbard obviously makes sense at either the right guard or the right tackle position to get him into the starting lineup. Sean Martin, James Hurd Jr., who we haven't heard really much of, other than that the coaches were really impressed by his pass rushing skills, but he needed to develop more of a game. So Trey Lathan, Jeremiah Trotter, their big 4-star linebacker who they were really high on, who unfortunately tore his ACL in spring camp. Ben Cutter, and the way he's given it his all since he started for Trey Lathan after getting injured in that TCU game, and obviously Aubrey Burks. So these are guys that are really, I would think, are your list who you would hate to like Prather, like Jordan Jefferson this past year, and like Charles Woods, who still have that opportunity to use either that first-time or graduate transfer, and I think are in for big seasons for 2024. And just this is what keeping this list of players together on paper are going to help you for 2024. So I think it makes some, and this is where I somewhat in my spreadsheet, I almost play like transfer bingo. So some of the guys that I'm watching for who this team could potentially either let walk or just could potentially go and use that transfer and find a new home. So I think with the uprise of C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White, Justin Johnson, and Jalen Anderson, because you have DJ Oliver, who was a redshirt this year, and the coaching staff is really high on, especially because of his awesome special teams play. Justin Johnson, unfortunately, didn't get that first-year redshirt, so he only has one more year of eligibility as a senior for next year. And Jalen Anderson has 2. He did get the redshirt year, and we've just seen him, with the emergence of White, drop down to about 4th on the depth chart. So does he potentially look elsewhere with another Dior Hubbard coming in as a true freshman? So there's 4 scholarship running backs out there. In the tight end room, I think that West Virginia has not I don't want to say unnecessary depth because you're always one injury away, but it's like if Cole Taylor is going to cost you maybe second most on the team in NIL, he's going to command a large amount of playing time just as he has this year. And then you have Traylon Davis, who's probably been your best blocker at the number 2 tight end position. So the guys behind him, Victor Wickstrom, Will Dixon, do they look elsewhere for playing time? Wickstrom, obviously, coming over from Europe. Does he look for something at, potentially the G5 level to go and get some playing time? Because I think he'll be in his 4th year and really hasn't seen much playing time. The writing may be on the wall there. Grayson Malashevich has an extra year of COVID eligibility, but I mean, can you find a holder anywhere else? I know he's listed as a wide receiver, but I mean, you got your receivers. So if he wants to stick around and it's not going to cost you anything to be the holder, cost you anything in NIL dollars, then I understand. Guys who I just don't think are like finding their fits at their positions. Braden Dudley and Orion Fisher. I was a little questionable of the signing by Fisher. I mean, a huge guy, huge, long, lanky guy. I mean, I wonder if he would be a perfect fit, I feel like, for the basketball team. But at 6'6", 205, do you really think that he's going to be able to put on, like, 45 pounds to potentially play at 250 to, play at Bandit? He might just be, you saw this with the guy from Germany that West Virginia brought in and that's why, like, if some of these younger guys want to stick around for more development, that's perfectly fine by me. Like, that's great. Let me get the name for you just so I don't forget it. Eric Burton. So Neal Brown and staff tried this with an overseas player, and I know Fisher's not from overseas, but a guy who was the same kind of lengthy body build, like prototype to try and play at this Bandit position that they have on the team. And I just don't know if necessarily he'll ever fit the mold, but if he wants to stay in the program and continue to get stronger and bigger, like, by all means, love to have him. That'd be great. But if he wants to go and potentially get some playing time, he might be a 3 or 4 year player that you need to work him into the system potentially. I don't know. Jared Bartlett has another year of eligibility. Does he want to graduate and either start into his life's profession, or does he want to come and play another year? But again, this is what I mean. This is a hard decision. I feel like that this coaching staff is going to have to make is like, what is he going to want to command in NIL dollars? He has this other year of eligibility. Do we see like a Jeff Pooler situation from a few years ago where he was a starter and then he ended up and played well and then ended up deciding to go to Northwestern for who knows reasons why. Yeah, maybe that just like they wanted to get younger and use his scholarship in other ways. So is that the same situation for Bartlett? I don't know. Because you do have a budding star potentially in James Hurd Jr. coming up next year. Tyron Bradley's played well, backing him up at that Bandit position. Another guy right behind him who hit the transfer portal last year but then ended up coming back because I don't know if there was much opportunity for him out there in the transfer portal, especially as he thought, was Tara Simmons. Now, Simmons has played well on special teams but really hasn't done much actually on the defensive side of the ball. So does he want to use one more year of eligibility to play special teams for this offense? With, as I said, the Bandit position really up for the taking, but I'm not necessarily sure if he'll ever be a starter on this team. I don't know. And then Jai Favris. I know the guy's really been unfortunate with injuries here and there throughout the years, but again, he's a guy that still has 2 more years of eligibility because he hit the system. He hit at the perfect year coming in 2020, was able to redshirt. So he's really a 4th-year player who you really haven't seen much take off. So does he try and look elsewhere? Similarly at the linebacker position with Cutter and with Lathan and with Trotter coming in at the linebackers to kind of like command those starting positions. And then another guy who I've been really hard on, and like it's nothing personal, but the unfortunate reckless plays that happened in Penn State game, or he had another personal foul, either it was in the Pitt game or the Duquesne game, I can't remember off the top of my head, but then obviously the play in the Oklahoma State game just had it for me with Andrew Wilson-Lamp. Now I know he would be the most senior, like upper class player at cornerback. Otherwise, it's just Jacoby Spells. So with all that being said on some of those guys, if they potentially hit the portal, those are just some names that I'm keeping my eye on to see if they stick around for next year or not. And I might be missing some guys who it might just be surprising to me that they want to go and test the waters and transfer. So all the power to them to go out there and see what they can get if they're not necessarily happy in their positions. Now, it's those guys on that list that I gave you, 16 or so, that like West Virginia really needs to keep intact. I thought it was very interesting from the seeing this on social media. I didn't turn into the full broadcast of three guys before the game with Brad Howe, Hoppy Kercheval, and Tony Caridi last week, but I guess Caridi dropped some nugget that Zach Frazier had heard through the grapevine of the dark webs of college football that Alabama was going to double his NIL money, and he instead stayed at West Virginia. So it just goes to show that when you have a program with good culture that's winning games, that's contending for conference championships, that's putting guys into the pros, that is really the concoction, that is the mold for players to trust into the system and not go to some of these other power players for the money. So that's why, Tyke Smith, Drashawn Miller, Akeem Mesidor, some of these other guys that have hit the transfer portal, and good for Smith. Smith's a two-time national championship, working his way toward a third at Georgia. Mesidor, not so much at Miami. So like all the power to them, but I just mean to say that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and that you should stay. And like the research and the data is coming back that it does so much better for players who are of starting caliber to stay within a system to build toward the future. Now, coaching changes happen. I get this, and then I get that, like in the case of Dixon, he's just kind of buried on the depth chart. You're going to see another year of Traylon Davis and Cole Taylor out at tight ends 1 and 2. So can he beat out those guys? Does he want to spend another year just kind of riding the pine? And this is obviously the hot topic issue that I've just kind of like dabbled in with all of you viewers these last couple of weeks with Nico Marchiol, is I'm very worried. And that's why this past weekend, this performance against Cincinnati, it kind of put the nail in the coffin that Garrett Green's your guy. That the system is built for Garrett Green. He's obviously flourishing. His rushing ability, I think if with the right quarterbacks coach, and I said this in the recap video, I think with the right quarterbacks coach that Green can take his game to the next level. If he can become a little more patient in the pocket, not get rattled, not just chuck the ball as hard as he possibly can and overthrow receivers, because we've seen a lot of this year. So that's what I'm worried about, is will West Virginia be able to make an offer to Nico Marchiol that he can't refuse from an NIL perspective? And then secondly, does he love it within the program? Does he love it within Morgantown that he's okay with potentially being this spot starter to Green in 2024? Spot starter in the means of if Green goes down with an injury, he's coming in to start with the hopes that then he becomes a full-time starter in 2025. I don't know. I'm not going to begrudge Nico Marchiol if he decides to go, into the transfer portal, try and find some opportunities elsewhere. But I think very highly of Nico Marchiol. He said all of the right things since he's been here. He's done all the right things since he's been here. So I want him to stay a West Virginia Mountaineer at all costs, at all possibilities. But again, I get it that this is, like I said this in my last video, I think last week when I was talking about Jimbo Fisher, is the payroll in college football for the blue bloods. And it's not going to make its impact as much this year because the TV dollars for the SEC and the Big Ten have not necessarily come in yet for these programs to. And again, it's not the TV dollars that that these schools are going to make that can then impact their collectives. That's not the way this works. That's why it was such a big deal when the IRS got involved with Texas A&M this past year that about making non-tax donations that could not be written off as tax deductions to these collectives, and that they're still trying this at state-by-state levels. But I guess the good old IRS is the ones who has the power over the NCAA in this kind of decisions, because you can only imagine if these Big Ten schools who are going to be making gobs and gobs of money from their TV contracts were then going to be able to use them to, pay the players in NIL dollars. We're in a failed system. I mean, I kind of already think that we're, getting closer and closer to Major League Baseball, in that you have the haves and you have the have-nots. And I think that West Virginia is like closer toward the top than they are the bottom, but they're definitely like around in the middle tier of, maybe a top 40 program in the country. And you see that in the way that the head coach is being paid. You see that in the way, and I guess the emphasis is on basketball. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, and I'm not necessarily knowledgeable of all the financials, but is West Virginia really going to be able to compete for conference to national championships in football, in basketball, in baseball? I don't know. That's hard for me to say, especially when there isn't necessarily any evidence to back that up and prove that claim. Now, I think that the writing was on the wall right there with the way Bob Huggins getting into his turning 70, that there was a feeling that his career was coming closer and closer to an end. Not in the manner in which what unfolded this past spring and over this summer, but the guy isn't going to coach forever. So if West Virginia could make one last push in NIL, in an influx of NIL cash into the program, he was already being paid like a top 10 coach in college basketball. He could get some star players like a Jesse Edwards, Kirk Kriisa, and Raekwon Battle. I know these are waivers and suspensions and all that notwithstanding, but you get what my point is Country Roads Trust, I don't know how much in cahoots with the university, but the athletic department wanted to see West Virginia win a national championship with Huggs at the helm before he left, in retirement. And they took their shot, and unfortunately it all blew up. So it's very depressing, and it's why I can't necessarily jump back all ho-hum back into basketball and talk about them. If you're wondering if I'm ever going to talk about basketball, I still need some time. I still need some time to digest and process what this past 6 months, 8 months has really been like, to look ahead at what the future is in store for this program. So for the football team, this is where I say, and I don't want to cut your nose off to spite your face with the basketball program, but it's there's this opportunity right now for football to lead this program moving forward into this with conference realignment, and like I said, West Virginia striving toward the pinnacle, to be up there with Utah, Oklahoma State, and some of the others that I've talked about in the last few videos, to be a leader in this conference and get to the college football playoff. So if there's an opportunity, there's a time. And if West Virginia can just beat Baylor on Saturday, like I said, get to their internally not set, goal of 8 wins to retain Neal Brown, retain these indispensable players that I've listed off for you. They're bringing in 19 new high school recruits who will, I believe this is by design, have a low floor in NIL dollars. that they can go out there and use some resources in NIL dollars to go get some guys that they missed on last year, like an Amari Gaynor, like a Braden Fisk, who had West Virginia in his top 3 before ultimately choosing Florida State. Amari Gaynor picking North Carolina. Jeffrey Mba, who was coming from Auburn, ended up choosing Purdue for whatever reason over West Virginia. So now West Virginia has some evidence to sell to these transfer portal recruits. Is if they can get to 8 wins, they can get to a nice bowl game. If West Virginia can beat a nationally ranked team in a bowl game, they're going to put Zach Frazier, maybe Beanie Bishop, and who knows if Wyatt Milam declares for the NFL. I wasn't the one who said that and spoke it into existence. Who knows? But you put a couple of players in the pros. You're sending Frazier off to the Reese's Senior Bowl. Like, you're creating this positive momentum for these recruits, transfer and high school, to trust the climb, to then make the extension. And make the ascension is the hashtag now that I'm really going with for this team in 2024. So, this is going to be a pivotal next couple of weeks that if we're seeing some, do not, say the sky is falling by seeing some of these players who I mentioned, who are kind of fringe players depending upon what they're asking for in NIL and playing time commitments and the demands that they make. If they leave in the transfer portal. Like, West Virginia has to, shed some weight, if you want to call it that. We're talking, unfortunately, about 18 to 24-year-old kids. So that's why, I hate to talk about these things and it's their lives and the way, they put their heart and their soul into their craft. So I don't want to look at it so black and white. But unfortunately, that's what is that unfortunately big-time Division I Power 5 college football has become such a business. It has become such a business. So you're playing with, 18 to 24-year-olds and their decisions. And unfortunately, it's just going to come down to those kind of hard cuts. So maybe all these players stay. And West Virginia is very quiet in the transfer portal. Yeah, they weren't all that heavy in the transfer portal, to be honest with you, last year. Besides the addition of Taylor, besides the addition of Devin Carter, besides the addition of Beanie Bishop, I think you need to go bigger. And a couple of positions are of glaring need to conclude this video is at cornerback, because Bishop's going to either NFL or just graduating, and then Malachi Ruffin is graduating as well, expend his eligibility. So if Wilson Lamp leaves, you're down to Jacoby Spells and then a whole bunch of guys who really haven't played at all, plus some true freshmen. So, unfortunately, for the 3rd or 4th season in a row, West Virginia is going to have to rely on transfer portal players at that cornerback position. Probably 2 of them, probably on both sides. And Spells, I don't think is necessarily made the kind of leap in year 2 that I was expecting him to. But that's namely because of how good Malachi Ruffin's been this year, that there just hasn't been an opportunity for him to get onto the field. And in this 4-2-5 scheme that Jordan Leslie deploys, you got 3 safeties on the field, so not necessarily a nickel corner. Spells has played here and there, but I haven't heard his name all that much. So, and then the other positions of need. So I already kind of talked about center. Are you going to replace him, Zach Frazier, with Yates, Landon Livingston, or do you go for an external option on the offensive line and then at right tackle to replace Nestor? Are you going to move Yates to center, Jaquay Hubbard at right guard, or are you going to throw him out at right tackle, or do you go out there and you go find a right tackle position? So there's 4 players, and I think that there will be some positions to secure some depth with some years of eligibility to use, as I've chronicled the last couple of a few episodes of how Neal Brown likes to use the transfer portal and get these guys kind of like JUCO players in for a first year where you contribute a little bit, and then you go out there and then you go and spend your full-blown starters. You saw that with Marcus Floyd, probably most notably. I know he got to start in the first game last year against no, he played in corner. Actually, I scratch that. Charles Woods whenever he got hurt in that game. But again, Marcus Floyd played a majority of the season last year. And then you have some outliers. You have some guys who just completely play out of their minds. I'm thinking an Anthony Wilson, who I think is now West Virginia's second leading tackler on the team, so he'll be back with eligibility for next year, and that's great, that's awesome. So I loved this, and EJ Horton, who's made some catches, and I think he's primed for a big year too for next year. Whether he's your second string wide receiver or third string, or at the worst case fourth string, so he's still going to command some targets. So it's just very. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I don't want to say too much that then makes me look like an idiot at the end of the day. But it's just to say that the overall theme for this entire video and for these next couple of weeks with West Virginia football is, first and foremost, beat Baylor on Saturday. Beat Baylor on Saturday, so we're not talking about, the sky is falling and West Virginia needs to fire Neal Brown and hire Jimbo Fisher or somebody else, an external candidate. So I don't want to have to go through all that. Please, for my sanity and for many others in Mountaineer Nation who want to see this program make that ascension in 2024. So stability and continuity, but then your retention efforts and all the players that I just listed, and what's their fair market value, and do you have that in the war chest Country Roads Trust to go and make those offers? And I hope that none of these players just are making astronomical demands. I can't believe that the West Virginia conspiracy account on Twitter today wanted to say that Jaheim White should demand $1 million in NIL. Come on. That's what like I said, the entire 2022 roster was paid right around there. So you're going to put $1 million of resources into one guy, just inflating that perception. It's just not good for anybody. It's not good for the player. It's not good for us fans. It's not good for, the perception of what NIL is and is used for, even though it is pay for play in today's world of college football with really still no rules by the NCAA on this, or, any government legislation that I don't think that's ever going to happen. So then we will obviously see some names and some guys transfer out of the program in the next coming weeks. Brown's anticipating it, and I think you can read between the lines of who I've laid out for you may be guys that are out the door. So don't need to say that the sky is falling and what's happening to this program because we're getting all these guys to transfer out. No, that's what happens in college football these days, but you got to keep the most important ones. And then in the upcoming couple of months, and it happened this past year, so it's going to last into the spring as well. After spring practice, you might see some names fall off the current roster, and then West Virginia bring in some more guys after spring camp. And what does that look like from a transfer recruiting perspective? So it keeps me up at night. If it keeps you up at night too, this roster management, I'd love to hear from you. Leave your comments here on YouTube. If you like this video and some of the other videos that are on my channel, please subscribe. We're getting closer and closer to 100 for this 2023 season, so woohoo, we're getting there. I really appreciate it. You don't know how much it means to me that you all watch these kind of crazy videos of all the thoughts that happen in my head on the time being. So want to know your thoughts. Want to know how you feel about retention, recruiting over these next couple of months, and how that plays an impact, a major impact, almost more so than just the games, because that's the difference. With college football, and recruiting is everything. You get the better Jimmies and the Joes, and granted, I'm not taking anything away from Kirby Smart, but if you recruit like Georgia, who Lane Kiffin said after that game, a couple of weeks ago, guys, we really tried against these guys, but they have 35 5-stars, and we have 4. That's the difference, is you got to get the Jimmies and the Joes because it translates to wins. Recruiting matters, always. And I'm already thinking about 2025 for their high school recruiting and how West Virginia is setting themselves up for that for this summer. So, awesome. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back later this week to preview West Virginia, Baylor. Thanks for tuning in. Hail West Virginia. Let's go.